Hey guys, it's Jeremy here on Metal Music Meltdown, back with another video. Whatever today guys is my next episode of my top 20 albums of each subgenre. And so people might be a little confused looking at this video, because a lot of people don't consider the new wave of British heavy metal to be like a subgenre. It's more of a movement that kind of happened between the mid to late 70s into the early 80s. So kind of between like 77, 78 through till 82, 83, 84 maybe pushing it, but 83 maybe. But it was such a big movement and so many classic albums out of Britain around that time, and very influential movement. And for me, when I think of certain albums, like for instance the debut Maiden album, when people ask me what kind of metal is that, really the subgenre would be traditional metal, I would say. But I always think of it as just the new wave of British heavy metal. Or what's, if they listen to another album from like Diamond Head or something, I'm like, oh, they're part of the new wave of British heavy metal. Like that's how I think of them. So to me, they are a subgenre. It was like a period in time where there was like a certain sound and demographic and region that came up with these, bands and albums, etc. But anyways, I just said, fuck it, I'm going to do a video based on that thing and kind of consider it a subgenre. Let's jump right in. And like I said, my time range I went from was like 78 until like 82, 83. That's where I kind of cut it off. I know the more condensed version of the movement's kind of between 79 and 81 more so. But most of my albums are in that range. But I think 82 was the cutoff for me. I don't think I have any albums from 83. So let's jump right in. At number 20, I went with the second album from Def Leppard. Some people might be surprised this is this low on my list. They're one of the biggest bands in the movement, but I'm just not a big Def Leppard fan overall. But I did really enjoy High and Dry. It was a very big album in the movement. And after the first couple albums were very much more heavy and more metallic, but then when they kind of relocated to the States, they kind of separated themselves from that movement and just wanted to do their own thing, more pop driven. And it worked because they sold, millions and millions of records. But yeah, I always loved this album. It was definitely part of the movement and definitely captured that sound back in the day. I'm just not the biggest Def Leppard fan. That's why it's a little bit lower on my list. At number 19, I have Samson, Shock Tactics. This was the last album to have Bruce Dickinson on vocals before he got poached to go over to Maiden. Really strong album, probably my favorite from the band. Really good rock and music. Earth Mother, Nice Girl, Bloodlust, Go to Hell, just some really good tunes on this one. And Bruce account sounds amazing. It's when he's in his prime, and it's just a really classic album, and one some people might forget of in the movement, but I think it was a really good album. Number 18, I went with the all-girl rockin' group Girl School. A lot of people, again, this is a band some people might not think of for the movement, but huge band, really big fan of these girls, and this is their second album, Hit and Run. But always my favorite from that era, from the new wave of British heavy metal. It's just some really good tunes on this one, like the Tush cover they did, the ZZ Top was really killer. Kick It Down, The Hunter, the title track was really good. Back to Start, just really good tunes on this one. Really important album, and not even for girls in metal, but part of the movement as well. It's just a big album and really catchy, good stuff. At number 17, I went with Witchfinder General with Death Penalty. This might trigger a little deja vu for you, because this was also on my doom metal list. But these guys had a good mix of new wave of British heavy metal sound mixed with doom metal. Very influential on doom metal scene, but it had a big traditional metal sound and just a killer album, one of my favorites of all time, and definitely a big one from that movement, and killer stuff. At number 16, I have Diamond Head's second album, Borrowed Time. Love this album cover, very fantasy driven, very cool album cover. Not their best album, but definitely maintained their sound. After the first two albums, they did change their sound a lot. In my opinion, if Diamond Head kept their sound, especially from the debut album, which we'll get to later, they should have been massive. That debut album had the perfect sound, and if they just kind of maintained that sound and style of music, Diamond Head would have been as big as Maiden, or they would have been massive. But unfortunately, they changed their sound a lot in the early days, the first few records, and I think that was kind of their downfall, in my opinion. But their first two albums are iconic. Love the second album, really good stuff still, and had to make my list. At number 15, I went with Holocaust and the Nightcombers. This is their debut album. Definitely my favorite album from these guys. I'm not the biggest fan of their other material, but I always love this album. Smoking Valves, Death or Glory, Come On Back, sorry, Maverick. Just some really good tunes on this one. And if you're not familiar with this band, some people might be wondering what this is. It's not what they weren't really a big band. They're kind of more of an underground, more kind of second tier band. But if you're not familiar with this, definitely check it out. Really good stuff. At number 14, I have Filth Hounds and Hades, the debut album from Tank. Another band that kind of went underground or gets kind of overlooked from this movement. Really good band, really good vocals, kind of a proto speed metal band, some really high intensity music, really good traditional metal with great guitar riffs, and just good songwriting. Just a really classic album. Always been my favorite album from these guys, the debut. They never really topped it after that, for my opinion. But yeah, great album. Check out Tank if you're not familiar with them. Next in line, we got Raven with their second album. I went with Wiped Out. Always been my favorite Raven album. They have some really good albums back then, though. And this is just the one I like the most songs from. Is from 1982. Battle Zone, Faster Than the Speed of Light, Bring the Hammer Down, Firepower. Just some really good tunes on this one. Pretty cool art cover as well. Album cover, really iconic. And yeah, Raven instantly came to my mind when I was making this list. And I picked the album that I kind of like the best personally. That kind of fell in that time frame. Next at 12, I think it is, I have Saxon with Wheels of Steel. This is a monster album in this movement. Saxon was definitely one of the biggest bands in it. And I love Saxon. They're so underrated in my opinion. They're very popular, but they should always be in discussion with Maiden and Priest and all those big bands. They're such a good band, such a great vocalist, really good guitarist, great songwriting. I'm not sure why they didn't reach the heights of like Maiden or like, Sabbath and all those guys. They should have been a much bigger band in my opinion, but I chose Wheels of Steel, really good tunes. Motorcycle Man, Stand Up and Be Counted, Freeway Mad, See the Light Shining, sorry. Just some really good tunes on this one. Super underrated band, but some of the most all-time classic old albums. Next in line here, we got the debut album from Venom, Welcome to Hell. This is one band that a lot of people argue isn't part of the movement because it had a really different sound. They had like a proto black metal, speed metal sound, but they were so influential and they fell into the time frame 81 that they were like, I had to put them in this movement. I know they had a different sound, but they were still from the same region, came out at the same time as the other bands in that same area. They did have a lot of, some of their sound was rooted in the new wave of British heavy metal sound, but they definitely had a more raw, aggressive kind of sound. They definitely stood out from their peers, but love Venom. Debut's kick-ass. So influential on black metal, thrash metals, death metal. Killer album, killer debut. So raw and aggressive. Just love it. And the next one here, Tigers of Pantang, Spellbound. Always been my favorite Tigers album. Gangland's a killer song. Hellbound, Mirror, Silver and Gold. Take It is really good too. There's a couple albums I could have gone with from these guys. I could have gone with Wildcat from 1980 or Crazy Nights as well from 81, but Spellbound's always been my favorite album from them. And John Sykes on guitar, Shredding Up a Storm, his guitar riffs were legendary. And yeah, love this album, a classic. Next here we go, another great classic album from the movement. I think it's number 9. See You in Hell from Grim Reaper. Super iconic album cover on this one. Just a really, really good band. The title track, See You in Hell, is amazing. Liar, Wrath of the Reaper, Dead on Arrival. Just some really good tunes on this one. Steve Grimmett vocals are insane. A very unique vocalist, but I love him personally. Really, really good band, super underrated, and their debut was always their best in my opinion. Next we got here Satan with Chord in the Act. This is kind of the only album Satan had during that time frame. This is actually 1983, so this is technically kind of pushing the boundaries of the time frame, but I put it in anyways because they're such a big album, and I didn't think I had any from '83, but I forgot about this. But really cool album, early Satan, and they didn't have another album until '87, and then they had a big gap where they didn't put another release out until 2013, and lately they've been just putting out banger after banger. There's been 1, 2, 3, 4, and they have a 5th one coming out this year that I'm looking forward to as well. But lately their output has been crazy, but back where it all started, Chord in the Act, really good vocals on these guys, and great songwriting, very unique sound, definitely has that new wave of British heavy metal sound, traditional metal, some doom elements in there as well. Just a really good band, very unique vocalist, but really good songwriting and guitar playing as well. And number 7, I think it is, I have a Saxon with their second album, Denim and Leather. This has always been my favorite Saxon album from back in that era. It's their 4th studio album, released in 1981, with songs like Princess of the Night, Never Surrender, Out of Control, and the band's Played On. Just some really good tunes on this one, all-time classic heavy metal album, one everyone should have in their collection, and honestly, I have yet to pick it up. I did a lot of old Saxon stuff I still need to pick up. I got into them much later, and there's tons of their albums I need to pick up still, unfortunately. And number 6, I think, I have their debut Iron Maiden album. Some people would put Killers, but most people prefer Killers as their best Maiden album from this early era. But I always like the debut better. I just like the songs on it more. Prowler, Phantom of the Opera, the title track is Killer, Sanctuary, Strange World, just a killer album. I love all the songs in this one. Daniel's voice is really suited it early on. I'm really glad he was in the band. Those first two albums are iconic, and I love them dearly. Always been 2 of my favorite Maiden albums of all time, and had to make the list. Number 5 is very controversial. I put Motorhead with Overkill from 1979. Another band most people argue aren't part of the movement. They did start a couple of years kind of prior to most of these bands. Like they kind of started mid-70s, 75, 76 they formed. But their first couple albums, this album didn't come out till 79, so it's in that era. And in my opinion, they're kind of the grandfathers of the new wave of British heavy metal. They came out in the proper era, but just a couple of years prior. And their sound was very influential on the bands like Maiden, Saxon, blah, 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 that came after them. So I had to include it in the list. I was also going to put, originally I was going to put Ace of Spades as well because I love that album as well, but I didn't want to push it because I'll hear it in the comments about how they're not part of the movement, blah, blah, blah. But in my opinion, they definitely are. They played a big role on the sound of the whole movement as a whole. They were just a little bit earlier to the game, but that's why you can't include bands like Priest or Sabbath because they were too early. Sabbath started in 70, and Priest was out even in the late 60s into the 70s, but Motorhead didn't really put out an album until like the late 70s. So in my opinion, they kind of squeezed into the movement, whereas Priest and Sabbath were just a little bit too early, and they're not really part of it in my opinion. But that's another argument for maybe another video. Number 4, another Venom album, Black Metal. Always been my favorite Venom album, 1982. It's killer. It's like black and roll kind of sound before black and roll was even a thing in metal. The title track, To Hell and Back, Buried Alive, Teacher's Pet, Countess Bathory is amazing. Leave Me in Hell, Sacrifice. I just fucking love this album. I listen to it all the time. Always been my favorite Venom album. I knew this was instantly going to be at the top of my list. So it's at number 4. Number 3, I went with the debut album from Angel Witch. I talk about this album all the time. It's always been one of my favorite albums from that time period. It came out in 1980. and definitely my favorite Angel Witch album, but all their stuff is really good. But yeah, just a really good album. If you're not familiar with these guys, please check this album out. Outside of Maiden, this is probably my favorite new wave of British heavy metal album in general, but there's two ahead of this one, and I'll kind of explain why the other two are ahead of it. But yeah, I've always loved this album. Aside from Maiden, it's always been like my favorite album from that era. At number 2, I went with Lightning to the Nations from Diamond Head. I picked this one ahead, number 2, first because I love this fucking album. It's killer. The title track, The Prince, Am I Evil is on this. It's an amazing song. Sweet and Innocent, The Electric, Helpless. I'm telling you, if these guys maintain the sound they had on this record, the intensity, the heaviness, the great riffs, the heavy riffs, these guys would have been up there with like Maiden and even above Saxon. Like they would have been like monstrous. But unfortunately, they changed their sound a lot, especially after the second album. And I don't know why they did so much, but it is what it is. But this album is iconic. Their debut album is just iconic, and it's always been my favorite. And in my opinion, it really captures the essence of new wave of British heavy metal the best. The sound of it. When I think of the sound of new age of British heavy metal, I think of Maiden, and I think of this album. That's why I put it ahead of Angel Witch. I think I prefer the Angel Witch album overall, like a hair better. But I find the sound of the Lightning to the Nations is just more fitting to the movement as a whole. It kind of personifies the movement, the sound from that time. And at number 1, guys, I had to go with Number of the Beast by Maiden. Again, some people might say this is too late. Came out in 1982. It's always been my favorite Maiden album. It's pretty much a hits album. Invaders, Children of the Damned, 22 Acacia Avenue, Number of the Beast, Run to the Hills, Gangland, and of course the epic Hallowed Be Thy Name. Top to bottom, it's a greatest hits album, and it's always been my favorite Maiden album, and from this movement, definitely the biggest album in my opinion. So let me know down below, guys, what any albums I missed or any bands. Of course, there's ones I didn't put on, but that's kind of what I came up with myself. And yeah, love doing this list. Let me know what subgenre I should do next. And until next time, guys, keep it metal.